April 10, 1972, 23:14. Brooklyn, New York. The air in Brooklyn smells of wet asphalt and cheap cigars. Outside St. Bernadette's Church, the streetlights flicker, casting long skeletal shadows over the black Cadillacs lined up like a funeral procession for the damned. Inside, the air is heavy with the scent of lilies and stale incense. Joe Gallo, Crazy Joe, lies in a mahogany casket, his face reconstructed with wax to hide the carnage from Umberto's clam house. The silence is broken by a rhythmic thud-click, thud-click. It's the sound of heavy leather shoes on marble. Salvatore Bill Bonanno walks in. He isn't supposed to be here. In the world of the Commission, showing up to the wake of a rebel is a declaration of war or a death wish. The tension is a physical weight, pressing against the lungs of every soldier in the room. Across the vestibule, leaning against a radiator, a young man with silver-brushed hair and a $2,000 suit watches. John Gotti. He isn't a boss yet, but he has the eyes of a hawk. He sees what the elders don't. He sees the black Chevy Nova parked 2 blocks down with its engine idling. He sees the way the floral arrangements are positioned to create blind spots. He's walking into a meat grinder, Gotti whispers to his associate Angelo Ruggiero, his voice a low gravel. Bill thinks he's here for a funeral. He doesn't realize he's the guest of honor for the next one. The sound of a heavy door bolting shut echoes through the nave. Thud. To understand how a prince of the mafia walked into a kill zone, we have to go back to the moment the peace treaty turned into a death warrant. In the underworld, the greatest mistake isn't losing your temper. It's assuming your enemies still follow the old rules. 6 months earlier, the Ravenite Social Club, Mulberry Street. The atmosphere inside the Ravenite was always the same. Espresso steam, the clack of tiles from a backroom Scopa game, and the muffled roar of Manhattan traffic. Bill Bonanno, the son of Joe Bananas, sat across from the old guard. He represented the white-collar mafia, legal fronts, political connections, the future. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that screamed Wall Street, not Mulberry Street. "My father wants stability," Bill had said, sliding a ledger across the scarred wooden table. "The chaos in the streets, the hits, the public spectacles. It's bad for the numbers. The feds are eating it up. We are handing them the keys to our cells." The elders, men like Carlo Gambino, nodded with feline grace, but their eyes remained cold. In the 1970s, the five families were shifting. The old Sicilian mustache Petes were being squeezed out by a hungrier, more violent generation. Bill was a man of logic in a world turning toward madness. He relied on the Bonanno name, a shield he thought was bulletproof. John Gotti, watching from the bar while sipping a double espresso, knew better. He understood that in New York, a name is just a target. Gotti had spent his youth in the trenches of East New York, earning his stripes through blood and hijacking. He knew that when the bosses talk about stability, they are usually buying time to sharpen their knives. "Look at him," Gotti remarked quietly. "He talks like a college professor, but out here nobody cares about your degree when the lead starts flying." The consequence of this meeting was a false sense of security. Bill left the Ravenite believing he had secured a pact. He didn't notice the way the Gallo loyalists, the Red Hook crew, were whispering in the corners. He didn't see the shift in the hierarchy. The decision to trust the old diplomacy was his first step toward the casket at St. Bernadette's. April 7, 1972, 04:30, Mulberry Street, Little Italy. The neon sign of Umberto's clam house flickered, reflecting in the oil-slicked puddles of Little Italy. Joe Gallo was celebrating his 43rd birthday. He was the wild card, the man who defied the commission, the man who integrated his crew and threw the old rule book in the East River. When the gunman burst in, the world changed. It wasn't just a hit, it was a public execution. 20 bullets transformed a birthday dinner into a slaughterhouse. The news hit the streets like a lightning strike at dawn. The effect of the legend began to take hold. People said Gallo was killed because he insulted Colombo. Others said he was moving in on the docks. But for Bill Bonanno, it was a logistical disaster. Gallo had been his secret back-channel contact for a massive heroin shipment moving through the Brooklyn piers. "If Gallo is gone, that shipment is untethered," Bill told his underboss inside a moving Lincoln Continental, the wipers struggling against a sudden downpour. Every rogue crew in the city will be sniffing around those containers. We need to show face at the wake. We need to claim the territory before the Genovese or the Gambinos move in. It was a tactical move, a game of chess played with human lives. But Bill was playing on a board he didn't fully see. The hit on Gallo wasn't just about Gallo. It was the bait for a much larger trap. The real target was the man who would be arrogant enough to come and mourn him. The tension in the city was palpable. The NYPD's Organized Crime Bureau was on high alert, but their instructions were clear. Stay back and let the wolves tear each other apart. The hook was set. April 10th, 1972, 20, Caen, a private suite, the Pierre Hotel. John Gotti sat in a plush armchair, the amber light of the hotel suite reflecting in his scotch. He wasn't supposed to be at the Gallo wake either. His bosses had told him to stay clear of the Brooklyn mess. But Gotti had an instinct for power shifts, a reading human ability that bordered on the supernatural. He could smell a vacuum before it even formed. Bonanno is going, Gotti told his mentor, Neil Della Croce. He thinks his pedigree protects him. He thinks the Gallo crew will respect his rank and his father's history. And you, why are you going? Della Croce asked, his face a mask of scars and wisdom. I'm going to watch the end of an era, Neil, Gotti replied, standing up to check his tie in the mirror. I want to see the moment Bill realizes that the floor is gone. The Bonannos are living in 1950. It's 1972. The rules are whatever the man with the gun says they are. Gotti understood the urban atmosphere of Brooklyn better than anyone. He knew that the Gallo loyalists were fueled by grief and cheap wine, a volatile mix that ignored the protocols of the commission. He knew that the hit team wasn't just made of Gallo's men, it was a coalition of those tired of the Bonanno hegemony. Bill Bonanno, meanwhile, was dressing in his finest silk suit in a safe house in Eastchester. He checked his reflection, straightening his tie with surgical precision. He felt the weight of his father's legacy, the men of honor tradition on his shoulders. He chose a path of reputation over survival. If we don't go, Bill told his wife, Rosalie, we look weak. And in this life, looking weak is the same as being dead. He kissed her forehead, a gesture that felt more like a final goodbye than he cared to admit. The car was waiting. The rain began to fall, a cold, needle-like drizzle that blurred the lights of the Brooklyn Bridge. April 10th, 1972, 23 hours. Entering Brooklyn. The drive from Manhattan to Brooklyn felt like crossing a border into a hostile country. Bill Bonanno's driver, a nervous man named Tommy, kept checking the rearview mirror until his neck craned. The Lincoln's tires hummed on the wet pavement, a lonely sound in the late-night quiet. "Boss, there's a black Chevy Nova behind us since the bridge," Tommy muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "It's been hanging back 2 blocks. Lights off." "Keep driving," Bill commanded, his voice cold. "It's a public street. They won't move on the main drag." This was the chess match. Bill knew he was being followed, but his arrogance blinded him. He assumed it was the FBI. He preferred the feds. They played by the book and were predictable. He didn't realize the Nova contained 3 men with sawed-off shotguns who had been told that killing a Bonanno would make them legends. The car pulled up to St. Bernadette's. The sensory moment was the sound of the engine dying, a sudden hollow silence that felt like being buried alive. Bill stepped out. The flashbulbs of the paparazzi popped like distant muzzle flashes. Gotti was already there, positioned in the shadows of a deli across the street, his collar turned up. He saw the Nova pull over near a fire hydrant. He saw the doors crack open just an inch, the interior dome light disconnected. He saw the glint of blue steel. "He's a dead man walking," Gotti whispered to Ruggiero. "Look at him. He's adjusting his cufflinks while the devil is reaching for his throat. He's worried about his image, and they're worried about their aim." Bill walked toward the church doors, his back a massive, inviting target. Every step felt like a minute. The consequence of his pride was now unfolding in real time. He was in the kill zone, a 50-foot stretch of sidewalk where no one could reach him. April 10th, 1972, 23:15, St. Bernadette's nave. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of guttering candles and the heavy, cloying floral stench of death. Bill Bonanno walked down the aisle. The Gallo crew, men with bruised knuckles and eyes like shattered glass, turned to look. The conversation died instantly. The only sound was the scratching of the wind against the stained glass. "You got balls, come in here, Bonanno," a voice hissed from the back pews. It was Albert Kid Blast Gallo, Joe's brother, his eyes red from crying and rage. "I come to pay respects to a man who fought for what he believed," Bill said, his voice steady, projecting an aura of legendary calm that he didn't feel. He knelt at the casket. He stayed there for exactly 60 seconds, his head bowed. It was a display of power, a way of saying, "I am untouchable." But beneath the silk suit, Bill's heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He could feel the heat of the glares on his back. He could hear the heavy, ragged breathing of men who were one word away from a massacre. Outside, Gotti watched the Nova. One man stepped out, a cigarette dangling from his lip, shielding the spark with his hand. He wasn't looking at the church. He was looking at the traffic lights. He was timing the escape. "They're waiting for the exit," Gotti realized. "They won't do it inside. Not in a house of God. Not because they're holy, but because it's too hard to get out of the pews quickly. They'll do it when he thinks the danger is over." The decision was made. Bill stood up, nodded slowly to the Gallo family, and turned to leave. He had survived the lion's den, or so he thought. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a false sense of victory, but the real danger wasn't the lions inside, it was the wolves, waiting in the rain. April 10th, 1972, 23:30, the church steps. As Bill reached the heavy oak doors, he paused. The sensory detail was the wind. It had picked up, whistling through the stone arches of the church like a funeral dirge. He saw his driver, Tommy, standing by the Lincoln, but Tommy wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at his shoes, his hands trembling as he fumbled with a Zippo. "Wait," Bill whispered to himself. The street was too quiet. The paparazzi had vanished, chased away by the rain or by a warning someone had whispered in their ears. He looked at the corner. The black Nova was gone. That was the red flag. In the mafia, a car disappearing is often more dangerous than a car following you. It means they've moved from tailing to intercepting. Gotti, from his vantage point, saw the setup perfectly. A delivery truck was pulling slowly across the intersection, its brakes squealing, blocking the Lincoln's path of escape. It was a classic L-shaped ambush, designed to pin the target against the church wall. "Here it comes," Gotti muttered, his eyes narrowing. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the darkness of a nearby alley. "Hey, Bill, give Joe our regards in hell." The flash of a muzzle lit up the corner of the street. Boom! The first shot from a 12-gauge hit the stone pillar inches from Bill's head. Concrete dust exploded in a white cloud, stinging his eyes and coating his expensive suit. "Get down!" Tommy screamed, but he didn't move toward Bill. He dove into the car, shielding himself. Bill Bonanno, the prince of the underworld, was alone on the steps. The urban atmosphere was now a battlefield. The sound of a second shotgun pump echoed off the brick buildings. Clack, clack. The streetlights seemed to dim as the shadows rushed in. April 10th, 1972, 23:32, the sidewalk. Bill scrambled behind a parked Buick, the metal groaning as bullets shredded the bodywork. Ping, ping, thud. He reached for his snub-nosed .38, but his hands were slick with cold rain and sweat. This was the consequence of his lifestyle, the realization that all the money, the political favors, and the legendary name meant nothing when the lead started flying. He was just a man in a box of steel. But then something unexpected happened. From the shadows of the deli where Gotti stood, a second group of men emerged. They weren't Gallo's men. They weren't Bonanno's men. They were Gotti's crew, though they wore no colors. Gotti hadn't come just to watch. He had come to ensure the chaos didn't spill over into Gambino territory, and perhaps to put Bill in his debt. "Clear the street," a voice shouted, not Gotti's, but one of his soldiers. A barrage of return fire erupted from the deli side, suppressed pistols, and a rapid-fire Thompson barking into the night. The men in the alley, caught in a crossfire they hadn't planned for, hesitated. In that split second, the chess match shifted. The hunters became the hunted. The error wasn't trying to kill him, Gotti would later tell the commission. The error was forgetting that in New York, someone is always watching the watchers. Bill didn't wait to see who his mysterious saviors were. He lunged for the Lincoln, diving into the back seat as Tommy floored the accelerator. The car fishtailed on the wet asphalt, jumping the curb and roaring past the delivery truck, just as the driver tried to block them. Gotti watched the Lincoln's red taillights disappear into the Brooklyn fog. He calmly straightened his coat, stepped over a spent shell casing, and walked away seconds before the first precinct sirens began to wail. He had seen what he needed to see. The Bonanno era was over. They were weak, reliant on ghosts and luck. April 11th, 1972, 09, A. A safe house in Queens. Bill Bonanno sat at a Formica kitchen table, his silk suit ruined, his face the color of ash. The social consequence was immediate. The news was everywhere. The hit on Gallo had been followed by a near miss on the Bonanno heir. The commission was in an uproar, calling for an emergency meeting at a hunting lodge upstate. They tried to take me at a wake pop, Bill said into a secure phone line to Arizona. No respect, no rules. They used a delivery truck as a block. It was a professional setup. The rules died with Gallo, Bill, his father's gravelly voice replied. The streets are changing. They don't want a king who lives in a palace. They want a boss who bleeds in the gutter with them. You're lucky to be alive, but luck isn't a strategy. The theme of loyalty was now a bitter joke. Bill realized that his own driver had been ready to leave him to die. He realized that the peace he had negotiated at the Ravenite was a ghost. He had survived the night, but he had lost his effect of the legend. He was no longer the untouchable prince. He was just another target that had barely escaped the grave. In the Bronx, the Gambino family was gathering. John Gotti was there, leaning against a brick wall, listening to the elders complain about the publicity and the mess in Brooklyn. Bonanno is a ghost, Gotti said, interrupting a capo. He's still breathing, but he's dead. He doesn't have the stomach for the new war. He's too busy wiping the concrete dust off his suit to realize he's already lost the street. The elders looked at Gotti. They saw the fire. They saw a man who didn't just survive the streets, he owned them. The logic of the old world was being replaced by the violence of the new. Present day, the streets of Brooklyn. If you walk past St. Bernadette's today, it's just another quiet church in a gentrifying neighborhood. The bullet holes in the stone pillars have been patched with gray cement, but if you look closely under the streetlights, the scars are still there. The story of Bill Bonanno's walk into danger is told in hushed tones in the few remaining social clubs. Ninguém sabia. Até ser tarde, the old-timers say, clutching their espressos. They talk about how Bonanno survived, but they always mention the man who saw it coming. John Gotti used that night as his masterclass. He learned that the old families were fragile and that a legendary name was just a heavy coat that made it harder to run. Bill eventually moved to Arizona, leaving the life behind to write books and look at the desert, a prince without a kingdom. Gotti, of course, went on to become the dapper Don, the man who would eventually break every rule Bill tried to save before the feds finally caught up to him. The moral of the story? In the underworld, reputation is a currency that devalues every time you use it. Bill spent his all in one night at a wake. Gotti saved his, waiting for the right moment to buy the whole city with blood. The sounds of Brooklyn haven't changed. The distant sirens, the tires on wet pavement, the whispers in the dark. The players change, but the game remains the same. What would you have done in Bill Bonanno's shoes? Would you have stayed in the car and looked weak? Or would you have walked into that church to save your family's pride, knowing a hit team was waiting? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. If you want more deep dives into the shadows of the 5 families, hit that like button and subscribe. The next story is already lurking in the dark.